It rained for 3 days and nights in the heart of autumn. In the middle of a barren field, a lone crow stood guard beside an empty jug. Each pebble it dropped wasn't just for water, but for a memory long forgotten by someone who once left their dreams behind. People thought the bird was thirsty, but no, it was resurrecting a promise, a fragment of soul, a whisper left behind in the season's first storm. This isn't just a tale about cleverness. It's the final lesson when a dry heart begins to believe again. The first rain of October had arrived not with thunder, but with a hush. A curtain of silver drifting from the sky, falling slow and steady, like whispered promises. The wind murmured through the thinning trees, sending golden leaves tumbling in spirals that danced for no one and everyone. Beneath this melancholic ballet of nature, a lone crow flew dark against the dull sky, his silhouette slicing through autumn's breath. He was tired, not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that settles into the bones of a creature that's been searching too long. Hunger had followed him for 2 days, but thirst, that dry, cracked echo in his throat, was becoming unbearable. His beak felt like stone, his tongue like ash. Still he flew, each beat of his wings a prayer. He passed over the quiet edges of the countryside, the kind of place where no cars passed, where porches creaked under the weight of silence, and the only movement came from falling leaves. He scanned the earth beneath him with eyes that had known both beauty and cruelty. He wasn't looking for food now. Not yet. First, he needed water. A single sip might give him the strength to fly farther, to survive one more dusk. Below, he saw the skeleton of a farm, a sagging barn swallowed by ivy, its door swinging half loose. A weather-worn house stood beside it, shutters, crooked roof, patched by time and neglect. The mailbox leaned as if it too had grown weary of waiting. The place had been forgotten by people, but not by the land. The fields still whispered, the rain still fell, and perhaps, just perhaps, something there might save him. He angled his wings and began to descend. The wind tugged at him as he approached a reminder that even the sky had its mood swings. His feathers were soaked now, and every gust felt like a shove. But he gritted through it, eyes locked on the small wooden porch beneath him. It groaned with age, its boards weathered gray and slick with rain. And there, tucked in the corner, was the first glimmer of hope he had seen all day. A jug, an old earthen clay jug. It sat beside a crumpled doormat, half covered in moss, beads of water, clinging to its sides. A survivor of many storms, worn but intact. The crow landed with a soft thud. His claws clicked on the wood. He shuffled forward, head tilted in curiosity, beak quivering with anticipation. He leaned over the jug's rim. Deep inside gleamed the faint shimmer of water, real water. His heart thumped against his ribs. He tried not to hope too fast. Carefully, cautiously, he leaned his head down into the jug. The opening was narrow. He stretched his neck, tensed his talons for balance, and he reached. His beak struck cold clay. Nothing. He blinked, startled, pulled back, tried again. Still nothing. The water, though present, was far too deep. He couldn't reach it. The realization hit him like the wind that had chased him through the skies. He stepped back, blinking rain from his eyes. Frustration rose in his chest, sharp and heavy. He circled the jug, poked it with his beak, tried nudging it with his body. It didn't budge. It was either weighted down or rooted to the porch itself. He let out a quiet caw. Not a cry, but something softer. A sound of confusion, of disappointment, of tired hope unraveling. The rain began to fall harder. Fat drops spattered across the porch, tapping the jug, drumming on the crow's wings and back. He moved under the narrow overhang, seeking dry ground. His feathers stuck together. His chest rose and fell with effort. He sat, not from weakness, but from the ache of defeat. The jug had water. The solution was there, but out of reach. The cruelty of it was almost human. He watched the jug from where he sat, half hidden in shadow. It seemed to watch him back, silent, full, and indifferent. The wind moaned through the trees beyond. A gust blew leaves across the porch. One brushed against his wing. He didn't move. He remembered thirst from summers past, remembered flying over scorched fields, over dying streams, the smell of heat in the air. He remembered losing a brother to dehydration during the dry season last year. He was not ready to lose this fight, not yet. His eyes scanned the porch again, and then they caught on something. Pebbles, small stones scattered like forgotten thoughts near the base of the steps. Smooth, round, worn by time and rain. He hadn't noticed them before, but now they seemed to hum with potential. He turned back to the jug, then to the pebbles. Something stirred in his mind. Not a memory, not instinct, but intuition. The quiet flash of insight that all crows are born with, but only a few trust. He stood, walked slowly to the nearest stone, wrapped it in his beak, and dropped it into the jug. Clink. The sound echoed inside the jug like a bell in a cathedral. He waited, peered inside. The water trembled. Barely moved, but it had moved. He picked up another pebble, dropped it, then another. Again and again, the process became a rhythm. Rainfall above, stonefall below. The water responded in whispers, slowly rising. Almost shy, he worked in silence. His actions steady, his purpose focused. No creature came to interrupt. Even nature seemed to still itself, the wind softening the forest, pausing in reverence. He wasn't sure how many stones he had used, but he didn't stop to count. His focus was absolute, pure. He was not just a bird now. He was a builder, a maker of miracles. As the rain softened, the light changed. A golden hue broke through the clouds, washing the porch in a soft glow. He paused, breathed, and stepped toward the jug. Once more, he leaned in. This time, his beak met the surface. Cool, clear, real. He drank, not in gulps, but in slow, grateful sips. The water soothed the fire in his throat, eased the tightness in his chest, quieted the storm within him. It tasted of clay and sky and patience. When he finished, he stepped back, water dripping from his beak. He closed his eyes. He felt the wind return, but this time it didn't push him. It lifted him. The world had not become easier, but he had become stronger. He looked at the jug one last time, then at the stones, then at the sky, and somewhere in his small, fierce heart, he knew this moment would stay, not just as survival, but as something more sacred, something remembered. The rain had quieted. Only soft droplets tapped from the eaves onto the damp ground below, like faint whispers left behind after a long symphony. The crow stood silently beside the old jug, soaked through, but with eyes glimmering with something that defied naming. It had just finished drinking, not in haste, not greedily, but just enough to calm the burning in its throat. This was not just water. This was grace, a reward for its quiet perseverance. And now it was no longer merely a survivor. It was a living testament to the miracle born from the simplest of acts, a small stone, a flicker of insight, an unwavering decision not to give up. The jug stood still, ancient, silent, its clay body cracked with age, but sturdy enough to hold what mattered. Moss clung to its base like the coats of seasons long gone. But today, the jug was no longer just an object. It had become a vessel of memory, a story without narration, without language, but powerful enough to soften even the hardest of hearts. Within it were rainwater and stones, small plain pebbles without polish or shape. And yet each one now bore meaning, a step, a hope, a heartbeat of determination. The crow gazed at the jug, like one stares into a living reflection. No one had witnessed the hours it spent gathering stones, flying back and forth, pouring the last bits of its energy into a plan that seemed absurd. But it knew, and that was enough. It didn't crave applause, didn't seek acknowledgement. Life had been preserved, and in its quiet, fierce heart, that was the greatest reward. The wind drifted gently across the porch, carrying the scent of damp earth, tender moss, and something that smelled like beginning. A strange warmth stirred in its chest. Not pride exactly, nor triumph, but a quiet fulfillment, a recognition that sometimes the world does change when we stay long enough to become the reason. It didn't fly away right away. Something urged it to stay a little longer, not because it was weak, but because it understood the most meaningful moments in life are not to be rushed through. Everything around seemed to slow. Even time, it felt, had paused to sit beside it and listen to the breath of a small creature that had achieved the impossible. The sky had brightened a little. The gray clouds began to retreat, letting thin strands of sunlight filter through. The light fell gently across the porch, resting on the crow's feathers, the weathered jug, and eyes that mirrored something sacred. Behind a torn curtain, another pair of eyes watched. An old man, vision dim back, curved with years, but a heart now awakened. He hadn't meant to watch, but he had been standing there for some time, unable to look away from the small creature outside. He had seen it all. Every trip with a stone, every drop into the jug, every silent effort that seemed futile but somehow brought salvation. Something inside him, something long buried, had begun to stir. Maybe it was memory, maybe belief, or perhaps something unnamed that flickered back to life at the sight of a feathered miracle. The crow didn't know it was being watched, but something in the air told it otherwise. A shift, a presence, a silent witness. It tilted its head slightly, as if bowing to something invisible and holy, then looked once more into the jug. The water still sat there, and somewhere in its being, a gentle thought emerged. If a single crow could make this happen for itself, then perhaps this world still held space for miracles. If only one was willing to try. The old man quietly opened the door. The rusty hinges creaked, breaking the silence like a soft chime. He didn't speak, didn't shout. He simply stepped out slowly, as if unwilling to disturb the sacred stillness that blanketed the porch. The crow turned its head. It didn't flee. It didn't flinch. It just looked back, calm, rooted, present. And between those age eyes and the sharp black gaze, something passed between them. No words, no cries. Just a silent recognition. I see you. I understand you. I believe in you. The man stepped toward the jug and peered inside. The stones rested in stillness. The water shimmered faintly. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. His heart understood. What lay inside the jug was more than survival. It was a message, a lesson without ink, a sermon without voice. A single bird had reminded him of something he had lost, a quiet strength. He once had a belief he had buried. The crow remained. It didn't blend into the sky or disappear into the forest. It stayed as if it too needed to anchor itself to this moment. The wind slipped around its damp feathers, now drying in the shy sunlight. A final drop of water fell from the roof and landed on the jug's rim, sending a delicate ripple across the surface. Time moved again, but this moment would linger. There were no cameras, no witnesses beyond the two of them. But between this man and this bird, something eternal had been exchanged. A truth that even silence could not hide. Life is not always won by the strongest, but by the most persistent. When the sun climbed a little higher, the crow finally spread its wings. Not with haste, not out of fear, but with calm resolve. It knew this place would live on, not in memory alone, but in meaning. It rose gently, lifting into the clean air, slicing through the sky, now swept with gold. Each wing beat carried a message across the wind. Stay a little longer. Try one more time. What seems unreachable may rise with one more stone. The rain had returned, not the stormy kind, but a soft curtain of silver threads descending from a sky thick with quiet. It was the kind of rain that didn't demand attention, just presence. It kissed the windows, traced rivers across the glass, and gently wrapped the world in stillness. Inside the small cabin, the old man sat beside the window, a blanket over his shoulders, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea that had long since gone cold. But he didn't notice the temperature. His mind, his soul were elsewhere out there on the porch, where the jug still stood, and where the crow had taught him how to see again. He had been alone for years. Truly alone. Not in body. Neighbors had come and gone. Mail was delivered, groceries gathered, but in spirit. Ever since she passed, the world had gone quiet. Or maybe it was he who had gone quiet, turning inward, shutting doors of the heart that had once opened so easily. He had stopped watching. The trees stopped tending. The flowers stopped listening for birdsong. The world had grayed, and he had faded with it, until that day, the day he saw the crow. Not just a crow, no, the crow. The one who had looked at an impossible jug and said, "I will not surrender." The one who made a miracle, one stone at a time. It had done something to him, something strange and profound. It had reminded him of the time he too had done the impossible. Years ago, when the farm failed, when the house needed repairs, and the money ran dry, when her illness came like a storm and left no cure behind. And yet, he had stayed, one day at a time, one act at a time. Love, like survival, was made of quiet choices. He rose from his chair, slowly, carefully. His knees protested, but his heart urged him forward. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, the rain whispering against his flannel shirt. The jug remained as the crow had left it, stones inside, water, rising almost to the lip, a few raindrops now adding to the quiet reservoir. He bent down and touched the jug's rim, not to move it, but to remember it, to honor what it now meant. In the distance, through the trees veiled in rain, a faint shadow moved. The crow had returned. It perched on a branch, not too close, not too far, just watching. Its black feathers gleamed with moisture, and its eyes, those intelligent, knowing eyes, locked on his. Neither moved, neither spoke. And yet the air between them hummed with something deeper than language connection. He didn't know why, but he whispered, "Thank you," not loudly, just enough for the words to slip into the rain and disappear. The crow tilted its head slightly, as if listening, as if receiving. The man felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, not from sadness, but from a strange kind of relief. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. Something had seen him. Something had offered a story that mirrored his own. In the days that followed, he found himself thinking differently. He rose earlier. He opened windows. He lit candles at night instead of letting the dark settle too fast. He even began to clean the old study, a room he hadn't touched since her books remained untouched on the shelf. He placed the jug by the window near a small fern that had long since withered. And slowly, carefully, he began adding new stones, not out of necessity, but as a ritual. Each one was a memory, a promise, a breath. The crow became a quiet visitor. Not daily, not predictable, but often enough that he expected it. It never came to be fed. It never begged or squawked. It simply landed nearby, watched, stayed a while, and flew off. And in those moments, the old man began to speak, not loudly, not always with words. Sometimes he would just sit and let silence be shared. Other times he would read aloud, poems, bits of scripture, her letters, and the crow would remain head slightly tilted, as if listening not just with ears, but with spirit. One morning, the man placed a bowl of water beside the jug, not for the crow per se, but as an offering, a gesture of respect. The crow came that evening, circled once, and landed near the bowl. It didn't drink immediately. Instead, it stared at the water, then at the man, and then delicately dropped a pebble into the bowl before taking a single sip. The man's breath caught. His hands trembled. He felt as if he had just witnessed a holy ritual. He began to write again. Not for publishing, not for anyone else, just for himself. Short notes, reminders, questions. He wrote about the crow, about the jug, about how silence can be a voice, how effort can be a prayer. One line repeated often. What you do in the quiet still matters. And it did. He was living proof of that now. The villagers began to notice a change. When they passed his house, they saw smoke in the chimney again. Curtains pulled back. Even a few flower pots on the porch. Someone mentioned seeing a crow that lingered longer than usual, always near the same window. Rumors grew gentle ones. Some said he had found a new pet. Others believed it was a sign from his wife. No one asked directly, but all nodded softly when passing by, as if honoring something sacred they didn't fully understand. Then, one day, a young girl from the village knocked on his door. She was no older than 10, holding a sketch pad, and wearing rain boots too big for her feet. He opened the door, surprised, and she asked, "Is it true you have a talking crow?" He chuckled for the first time in years, a low, surprised laugh that echoed off the rafters like birds taking flight. "No," he said gently, "but I think it understands more than we do." She handed him the sketch. It was a child's drawing, crude, but filled with heart. A black bird beside a jug, a man with a cane, smiling. "That's you?" she said proudly. "And that's the crow that saved you." He stared at the drawing for a long moment, then knelt beside her, touched the paper with reverence. "I think you're right," he whispered. "I think it did." That night, the crow returned again. Perched higher than usual, its silhouette etched against the full moon. The man sat beside the window, the jug between them. He lit a candle and placed the child's drawing beside it. The flame flickered. The crow cawed, once, just once, and flew into the dark. But it left something behind, though no one saw it, a single smooth pebble placed neatly on the windowsill, as if to say, "This is not the end. Keep building." And so he did. The next morning arrived with a gentle hush, as if the entire world had agreed to whisper. No breeze shook the trees. No cars echoed in the distant road. Just the sound of breath. His breath moving in and out, like tides returning to a quiet cove. The old man stood by the window, his fingers curled loosely around a cup of fresh tea, this time warm and sweetened just the way she used to make it. Outside, the jug caught the morning light. The pebble on the windowsill remained unmoved, and the child's drawing still stood beside the candle, slightly curled at the edges, but full of life. For a moment, he imagined that she would have loved it, that wide-eyed crow, the smiling stick figure of himself, and that hopeful little jug, drawn with more heart than proportion. It was imperfect, but so was memory. So was love. That day, he walked farther than he had in years. Not far, just down the hill, to the meadow she used to adore in springtime. The grasses were damp and tall, brushing his knees as he moved. At the edge of the field stood the old bench he had forgotten. It was weathered moss at the legs, vines curling like fingers over the sides, but still steady. He sat down slowly, carefully, and felt the way the wood sighed beneath him, like an old friend. From his pocket, he pulled a notebook, a new one, and began to write again. He wrote about her laugh, soft but quick, like the flutter of wings. He wrote about the way she hummed while baking out of tune and unaware, about the garden gloves she always misplaced, about the way her hands knew how to mend things, clothes broken, chairs, broken hearts. He wrote until the sun shifted behind the trees. Then, in silence, he drew a small crow in the corner of the page. His hands weren't steady anymore, but he didn't mind. The crow didn't need perfection. It only needed presence. When he returned home, the crow was waiting. Perched not on a branch this time, but on the porch railing. It didn't move as he climbed the steps. Its eyes followed him, calm and ancient. He sat beside it, not too close, just close enough. For a while, neither of them moved. Then the crow hopped forward, dropped a small object by his foot, and flew off into the trees. He bent down and picked it up. It was not a stone this time, but a tiny button, smooth and worn sky blue. He gasped, not because of the button, but because he recognized it. It had come from her coat, the blue wool coat she had worn every autumn. She used to joke that the coat made her feel like a falling leaf caught midair. He had mended that coat so many times. He had thought it lost, buried somewhere in a box, or maybe long given away. And yet, here it was, a button, brought by a crow, carried from where that night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window with the button in one hand, the pebble in the other. What was the crow trying to say? Was it memory? Message? Miracle? He did not pretend to understand, but he knew enough to honor it. He placed both objects inside the jug. They sank slowly into the water, resting atop the pebbles like seeds in soil. A thought came then, quiet and uninvited. Maybe that was what he had become, a vessel. Not broken, not discarded, just waiting to be filled again. The seasons shifted slowly, as they always do. Autumn deepened. The leaves began to fall in earnest, 1,000 tiny sails drifting through the wind. He found himself sweeping the porch more often, as if preparing it for someone. He added another chair beside his, just in case. The crow still came now and then, sometimes with stones, sometimes with found objects. A ring, pull a thread, a dried leaf shaped like a heart. Each one he kept, not as trophies, but as offerings, as puzzle pieces in a mystery he no longer needed to solve, only to receive. One afternoon, a stranger knocked. A young woman wrapped in a scarf, carrying a camera around her neck and a satchel full of notebooks. She introduced herself as a journalist, writing a story about the silent kindnesses of small towns. She had heard of the man and the crow, of course. Stories traveled. She didn't ask for an interview. She asked for tea. He welcomed her in. They sat by the fire, spoke of nothing and everything. She never took notes, but she listened with her whole body, and that was enough. Before she left, she asked if she could take a photo of the jug. Not him, not the crow, just the jug. He nodded. She framed it in the soft golden light, clicked once, and smiled. "It's not just a jug," she said softly. "It's a memory garden." He blinked, surprised by the accuracy. "Yes," he whispered. "That's exactly what it is." After she left, he sat for a long time, hands folded. Then, with slow fingers, he reached into the jug, took out one stone, and placed it beside the candle. The photo of the jug arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. She had printed it on thick paper, signed it only with her first name, and written on the back, "What we remember lives. What we tend grows." He framed it. Winter crept in. The trees grew bare. The crow came less often, and he missed it. But he did not despair. Some love stories are like that, cyclical, migratory, returning only when the soul is ready. He began writing stories again. About a young couple building a house from driftwood. About a girl who teaches a dragon to sing. About an old crow who gathers lost things and returns them to those who need them. His world grew bigger. Not outside, inside, and sometimes when snow whispered against the window and the fire danced low, He swore he could hear it, the soft clink of pebble meeting water, the beat of wings, the flutter of memory landing home. The snow came like a whispered promise, quiet, persistent, softening the world into something unfamiliar and beautiful. It blanketed the field behind the cottage and lay gently upon the slanted roof where moss had once ruled. Icicles hung like silent wind chimes, the windows fogged with warmth inside, and the old man's breath danced in the air each time he opened the door. Winter had arrived, not with a storm, but with a hush. And in that hush, he listened, not to voices, not to the crackling of wood or the ticking of clocks, but to the spaces between, to what winter says when everything else falls silent. He kept the jug near the fire, now not too close, just enough to keep the water from freezing. The stones inside shimmered slightly in the light, their colors deepened by the cold. Each one held a story. He didn't label them or try to arrange them. He simply let them be. When guests came, and a few did, once word of the jug man reached further, he'd show them the jug, but never explain it. If they asked, he'd smile and say, "It's a journal, written handist without words." And they'd nod, unsure whether he was joking or simply wise. One morning, he awoke to a noise unlike the others. Not wind, not a branch. A sound of distress, sharp and feathered. He stepped outside, wrapped in a wool coat too large for him, and followed the sound past the tree line into the frost-hardened brush. There, nestled under a tangle of dry branches, was the crow. Its wing was bent, not bloodied, just wrong. It looked up at him, and something in its eyes shook him. Not fear, but trust. As if it had come not because it had no choice, but because it remembered. He carried it home in his scarf, wrapped gently like a secret. Inside, he cleared a space near the fireplace. A box, soft cloth water in a saucer. He didn't speak to it. He didn't name it. He simply sat nearby, reading aloud in the evenings, keeping vigil as it healed. And in that shared silence, something opened, not in the crow, in him. A space he had sealed long ago, believing no one could enter without hurting it. But here was this wild thing, broken brave and trusting him with its pause between flight. Days passed. The wing began to mend. It moved a little more each day, hopping from box to floor to windowsill. He never caged it, never asked it to stay. But each time he left the room and returned there, it was still near, as if healing had tethered them both. He began talking to it, not about grand things, simple things, what he missed, what he wished, what he feared. The crow listened the way some old friends do, not to fix, not to answer, just to be present. One evening, snow fell hard. It wrapped the cottage in silence so thick it muffled even memory. He lit every candle he owned, and the room glowed golden like it used to when she decorated for winter. He sat by the jug, holding the blue button again. He remembered the day she'd lost it. They had laughed, looking for it in the yard, in her pockets, even in the teapot. She had smiled and said, "Some things disappear when they're ready to be found again." He looked to the crow, perched now on the edge of a bookshelf, eyes calm and steady. "You brought it back," he whispered. "Did she send you?" The crow blinked. No answer, but the room felt full of her, of winter, of everything they once shared, and everything that remained. The next morning, the crow flew again. First to the table, then the door, then the sky. It circled once above the house, a dark arc against pale clouds, and vanished into the woods. He watched it go without grief. He had been given more than he'd lost. From then on, he began to write differently. Not about sorrow, but about return. He wrote stories where lost sisters found each other, where old lighthouses still shone for ghost ships, where broken wings learned to dance with the wind again. He mailed these stories to children's hospitals, to nursing homes, to shelters. He never signed them, just tucked a drawing of a crow in each envelope, and the phrase, "Even in winter, something waits to bloom." One day, a letter came, addressed only to the jug man. Inside was a crayon drawing. A child's hand had drawn a crow, a jug, and a smiling man holding both. On the back, "Thank you." The story helped me not be scared. He held the paper to his chest and cried not out of sadness, but out of relief. He had not been forgotten. His stories mattered again. He mattered. The jug began to fill slowly. More stones, a thimble, a pressed flower, a feather, each one placed in silence like prayers. He had stopped asking where they came from. He only knew they belonged. And every time he looked at the water, he saw more than reflections. He saw fragments of a story still unfolding. By late January, the days grew longer again. Light returned little by little, slipping in through the windows, like old friends knocking softly. He took more walks, longer now. His cane tapped steady rhythms in the snow. Children waved from porches. Neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years began stopping by, not to gawk at the legend, but to sit, to share tea, to ask, "Do you have any more stories?" And he did. He always did. One afternoon, as he returned from town, he found something unusual. Not a stone, not a trinket, but a folded piece of paper on the porch. It was heavy, the kind that crackled when opened. Inside was a drawing, not a child's this time, a painting, watercolor, a crow mid-flight over a jug overflowing with stars. At the bottom, a single line in careful handwriting. Grief is the first language of memory, but hope is the song. He framed it beside the photo from the journalist. 2 images, one captured, one created, both born of something unspeakable and beautiful. The snow began to melt. The earth breathed again. Crocuses peeked through the frost, stubborn and bright. And he knew spring would come, not just outside, but within. He didn't know if the crow would return, but he didn't wait for it anymore, because he now understood some miracles don't need to repeat. They only need to arrive once loud enough to echo forever. And sometimes, in the quietest season, love writes itself back into the world through wings, stones, and the gentle song of water, rising inside a just once thought empty. The thaw was gentle, not sudden. It came like forgiveness, slow, soft, undeserved, yet deeply welcome. The snow receded, inch by inch, revealing patches of brown earth beneath soggy and wrinkled like skin after a long soak. Buds trembled on the branches. The air no longer bit, but brushed against the skin like a curious child, wondering if it was safe to play again. And in that uncertain warmth, the old man woke each day to a new sound dripping. Water from the eaves, water from the trees. Water that once was snow, becoming again what it was always meant to be. He walked more now, with a steadier step. His cane still tapped a beat, but it sounded less like survival and more like rhythm. Birds returned, small ones, chattering ones, but not the crow. Not yet. Still, every dark wing overhead made his heart rise for a moment, then settled gently back in its cage. He didn't mind. The waiting no longer hurt. It had become a companion of its own. Inside the cottage, the jug sat proudly on its wooden table like a shrine. It no longer felt like a memory. It felt like a voice. Not one that spoke aloud, but one that sang beneath everything, like the low hum of bees returning to a garden. The water level had risen slightly. He hadn't poured any in, but each morning it glistened fuller than the day before. He chuckled once, tapping the side of the jug, whispering, "You've got your own weather system now, don't you?" New things had begun to appear beside it. A smooth stone, the color of rust. A child's drawing, folded into a paper crane. A ring of twine tied in a perfect circle. He didn't see who brought them. He didn't ask. The town had changed. Or maybe he had. People came not just to see, but to add. The jug had become something shared. Not a mystery to be solved, but a truth to be held. A reminder that everyone was carrying something, hoping for a place to lay it down without judgment. One rainy morning, as thunder grumbled low and half-heartedly in the distance, he found a woman on his porch. She looked about 40, damp from the walk, her eyes uncertain, but brave. In her hands, she held a red marble. He opened the door wide without speaking, and she stepped in with a breath that shook her shoulders. "It was my brother's," she said. "He used to keep it in his pocket when we were kids. Said it helped him feel braver." Her voice caught. "He passed last year. I didn't know what to do with it until I heard about you." He didn't answer with words, just held out his hand. She placed the marble in it, warm from her palm. He walked over and gently dropped it into the jug. It clicked softly as it landed among the others. And then he did something he hadn't done in months. He took out the blue button, cupped it in both hands, and showed it to her. "She used to wear this on her favorite coat," he said. "It popped off one day, vanished, found its way back here years later inside the jug. Sometimes things return when we're ready to let them speak." The woman nodded, and for a while, they just sat, two strangers with stories folded inside them, like winter coats no longer needed. After she left, he made tea and sat by the window. The clouds broke open to let a shaft of light fall across the field, and in that light, he saw something moving. A flutter, a black wing. His heart didn't race this time. It expanded slowly, like a sponge in rain. The crow had returned, not soaring, not diving, just gliding low across the grass, as if it had never left. It landed on the fence post and cocked its head. "Well," the old man said aloud, "took your time." The crow blinked once, then hopped down and walked, yes, walked up to the porch steps. He opened the door, but the bird didn't enter. It turned, looked out at the field, and waited. So he followed. Together, they walked to the old tree, the one where he first saw it long ago. At the base, beneath a pile of soft leaves, something glinted. He reached down, brushing aside the foliage, and found a small metal locket. Inside was a photo, barely visible, two children laughing. On the back, scratched in tiny letters, "For when we forget to remember." He held it to his chest and turned to the crow. "You've been busy." The bird cawed once, almost like a laugh, then took flight, not away, but upward, circling the tree once before landing high on a branch. Watching, guarding, remembering. He brought the locket home and placed it beside the jug. For the first time, he lit a candle beside it. A vigil, not for loss, but for love. For what remains, for what returns. That night, he dreamed. He stood in a vast field under a sky full of stars. Not the cold, distant kind, but stars that pulsed like heartbeats. In the center stood the jug, tall and glowing, water, rising and rising until it spilled over, becoming a stream, then a river, then a sea. From the sea came voices, not screaming, not calling, but singing. The song had no words, but it told everything. Of love lost and found, of wings broken and healed, of the long, quiet work of remembering who you are when the world forgets. He awoke with tears on his face and the sound of wings outside. The days passed and the trees bloomed. He planted herbs again, basil, mint, rosemary. He carved small signs and placed them along the trail near the woods. Take what you need. Leave what you can. And people did. Sometimes a poem, sometimes a photograph. Once a shoe with a note that read, "I walked away from who I was in this. I'm walking toward who I might be." He smiled every time. One evening, as dusk painted the world in lavender and gold, he sat by the jug and whispered, "I used to think grief was the final chapter." He ran his fingers along the glass. But maybe it's just the turning of a page. Outside, the crow called once, not loudly, just enough to say, "I hear you." And so the man wrote. Not because he had to, because the words came now, like the spring, gently, persistently, without permission or need for explanation. He wrote of jugs and buttons and birds, of women on porches and children who send drawings to strangers, of marbles and locket photos and dreams that taste like music. And with each word, he poured another drop into the world, a world ready again to remember what love can do when given a second chance. The summer came not as a blazing spectacle, but as a quiet inheritance. Long days, soft winds, evenings that lingered like the last chord of a lullaby. The village had changed subtly, as if someone had retuned the world just a few notes higher. Children played longer in the fields, laughter echoing past sundown. Strangers stopped by the cottage, not to gawk, but to breathe. The jug, now slightly cracked near the rim, sat like a quiet witness to everything. Not broken, just weathered. Like the old man. Like all things that survive by remembering how to bend. One morning, the jug was full, not with water alone, but with light. He didn't know how it happened. He hadn't poured a drop in for days. But when he approached the table and looked inside, the jug shimmered, not merely reflecting sunlight, but holding it, as if the dawn itself had curled up to sleep within the glass. Floating at the top, the blue button swirled lazily like a tiny moon. Below it, the red marble glowed. The paper crane was barely damp, and the twine had unraveled slightly into a heart. He reached for it and paused. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the ache to touch. He felt something fuller awe, not at the jug, but at what it had become. Not a relic, not a mystery, but a memory, a vessel for every fragment people brought when they had nowhere else to lay their sorrow. And now it had begun to remember on its own. Outside, the crow perched on its usual post. It had grown older, too. Feathers, grayer movements, more deliberate, but its eyes sparkled with mischief. As the man stepped out, it flapped once and dropped something at his feet. A coin, not an ordinary one. Old, foreign, the kind lost between generations. He picked it up, recognizing it instantly. It had once been his father's, kept in a drawer, forgotten, then stolen by time. How, he asked softly. The crow cawed once and hopped closer. It didn't answer with words. It never had. But its presence was an answer in itself. That some things find their way back. That what's meant to return does so not in our time, but in the time of the soul. Later that afternoon, he began writing again, but this time not for himself. He wrote names, stories, memories people had whispered into the jug, into the air, into the spaces between silence and longing. He wrote them on thin strips of parchment, rolled them gently, and placed them into an empty glass bottle. When the bottle was full, he sealed it with wax, tied it with blue twine, and left it at the edge of the field. The next morning, it was gone, and in its place, a new jug, smaller, clay, handcrafted, painted with a single black feather. He didn't know who left it. He didn't need to. The cycle had begun again. In the weeks that followed, people brought more than objects. They brought music, stories, laughter. Some came to cry, others to listen. Children drew chalk wings on the path. Elders brought seeds. The jug became the center, but never the reason. The reason was always the same, the quiet human longing to be seen, to be remembered, to belong. One evening, a girl arrived with a violin. She couldn't have been more than 12 freckles scattered across her nose like stars across a dusk sky. She didn't speak, just nodded at the jug stood before it and played. The notes she conjured were soft, hesitant at first, then blooming like petals in sunlight. The melody wasn't grand, but it pierced deeper than any hymn. It reminded him of something, someone. A tune hummed long ago by a voice now gone. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. When she finished, she placed the bow down, stepped forward, and whispered, "She taught it to me. My grandmother. She used to hum it when the world got too loud." He nodded. "I think she would have liked it here," the girl said, touching the side of the jug. "She's already here," he replied. That night, a breeze stirred through the cottage and blew open the pages of his journal. Not randomly, but with purpose. The book settled on a blank page, and without knowing why he wrote a single line, "The water remembers who we are when we forget." He stared at the words, not as a poet, not as a man, but as something quieter. A witness, a bridge, a heart that had stayed open long enough for others to pass through. In the dream that followed, the field became an ocean. The jug floated atop its waves like an ark. Inside were all the memories, all the fragments, all the tiny artifacts of love and grief and hope. Around it circled birds, crows, sparrows, robins, owls, each carrying something, each guarding. And from the horizon, a figure approached, a woman with gray in her hair and stars in her eyes. She didn't speak. She only reached out and placed her hand on the jug, and it sang, a sound like no sound, just a feeling, a warmth, a return. He woke up gasping, smiling alive. The final days of summer stretched like golden thread. Time felt less like a clock and more like a breath. He no longer feared what might come. He had become part of something bigger than himself. Not in a loud way, in the way that roots hold trees long after their leaves are gone. One morning, he woke with pain in his chest. Not sharp, just full. Like too much light in a fragile jar. He rose, dressed, and walked outside. The crow met him at the edge of the field. It tilted its head, then took flight, not alone. Behind it came a dozen black wings, then dozens more. A murmuration of memory. He followed slowly, step by step, until he reached the place where it all began, the stump. The old stump, long covered in moss and thyme, and on top the jug, not the one from his cottage. A new one, empty, waiting. He sat beside it, leaning his back against the earth. He took the coin from his pocket, the blue button, the locket. laid them gently inside. He whispered a final word, not goodbye, not even thank you, just remember. As the wind carried his breath skyward, the crow landed on his shoulder. It didn't move for a long time. When the townspeople found him, he was at peace. Eyes closed, face turned to the light, the jug beside him glowing with mourning. They didn't weep, they sang, and so the jug remained, and another, across towns, across time. People still bring what they carry. And in every jug, in every glimmering surface, you can find a small reflection, not just of yourself, but of something sacred, the proof that love endures. That memory is a kind of water, and that somewhere, always the crow is watching, not to take, not to judge, but to remind us that the soul, once poured out in love, never truly dries. And so the crow flew off, not with a trophy, not with applause, but with something far greater, a heart no longer dry, a world no longer silent. Sometimes it takes only a stone, dropped in still water, to remind us that we are not forgotten. If this story whispered something to you tonight, a memory, a hope, a quiet ache you almost buried, then let that be the miracle. Thank you for listening. May your autumn be gentle, and may your thirst always lead you to grace.